separate recipes that are going to come together to be our final product. So we kind of have two separate mise en places. So the first mise en place is for our dough, which uses the creaming method. So in this instance of the creaming method, we're going to use a mixer. So we have our stand mixer here, our mixer bowl, which already has some of our ingredients in it, our paddle attachment, spatula to scrape down our bowl, as well as all of our ingredients. So we have our fat and sugar, which are butter and brown sugar. Then we have our eggs and our vanilla, our dry ingredients all mise en place together, and then our mix-in, which is going to be oats. So that's the first part of our mise en place. The next part of our mise en place is going to be the chocolate fudge filling. So we have all of our ingredients here in one bowl, as well as a pot of water. And then the last part of our mise en place is to prepare our pan. So this is called a hotel pan. This is a half hotel pan, so there have much bigger ones, but this is a half hotel pan. And I just need to get some parchment. So I've already cut parchment to the right size. And then I'm gonna spray down the bottom of my pan. And all that's gonna do is when I go to spread out my dough later, it's gonna make it so the parchment doesn't move quite as much on me. So I'm just gonna kind of give that a little pressure so it's stuck, and now that's ready. So I can go ahead and get started on my dough. Okay, our mise en place is ready, so we can go ahead and get started making the dough for our oatmeal fudge bars. So this is the traditional creaming method, just like we've been doing with our cookies so far. So we're gonna go ahead and start mixing, just exactly how we already know how to do. So we're gonna start off with our fats and sugars in our mixer bowl. So that's our butter and our brown sugar. And we're gonna cream this until it's all nice and light and fluffy. Remember that when we do creaming method in the industry, we pretty much always use a mixer. So I've got that in with our paddle attachment. We're gonna start on first speed. Whoops, I'm not plugged in. That would be helpful. There we go. And I always forget to do this. Always, always, always. So we're gonna let that go. While that's going for us, that's one of the reasons why we're on the mixer. We have our hands free so we can work on other things. So remember, we always want to combine all of our dry ingredients first. So we have our leavener, our salt, and our flour in here. So we're just gonna mix these together. So they're all the way mixed in. Kind of got mixed together a little bit. I'm gonna scrape my bowl and my paddle. You can definitely see there's a little bit of butter that's kind of stuck in the tines of my paddle attachment. I'm gonna go ahead and move that up to medium speed. I never really want to say first, second, third. I like to say medium or high because every mixer has a different amount of speeds. Our bigger mixers in the back have 4 speeds, so third speed is not the highest speed. My mixer at home has 10 speeds, so speed 3 is actually low. So hopefully you can already see that it's changed colors. It goes very, very quickly with our mixer. So I can stop and I can scrape my bowl again. Again, just making sure it all gets nice, light and fluffy. Because we incorporated some more air, which is exactly what we want. And since I already have it off the mixer, I'm going to use this opportunity to just go ahead and scrape this bowl extra good. It's certainly easier to scrape the bowl off of the mixer, but it take a little bit more time to keep taking it off and putting it back on. So a lot of times with the machine we won't take it off. It kind of depends. Sometimes if I just feel like it needs a good scrape, I'll make sure to take it off, but most times I don't. Put it back on. Now I'm going to add my eggs. Do we add our eggs all at once, or do we add them gradually? We add them gradually. So I'm going to add, and try to add one at a time. So remember, you want to go until it's all the way mixed in. That egg is all the way mixed in now. There's another way you can kind of scrape your bowls. You can actually just use the paddle. If you've taken it off like that. Sometimes I'll do that. Again, you could just scrape it on the machine. I just want to make sure I got a good camera angle for you guys. So now I just add my other egg. Remember that we need time for those the emulsifier and our egg yolk, that lecithin, to get to work. That's why we need to add our eggs gradually. So mix that all the way incorporated. Scraping off the mixer, you can totally scrape it while this is all still on the mixer. I just want to make sure that you can see what I'm working with here. Alright. And just like with our cookies, we're going to add our creaming method cookies. We're going to add all of our dry all at once. Oops, that was there. And in this cookie, we do have a mix-in at the end, which is our oatmeal. So when I add the flour, I'm going to mix it to like 90-95% of the way done. All the way mix through it, and then I'm going to stop it and add the oats. That way, I don't mix it too long with my flour. Remember when we take flour, wheat flour, and we agitate it with moisture, we get gluten. The more we agitate it, the stronger it gets. We don't want it to be particularly strong here. We want this to be nice and tender, so we don't want to mix it longer than we have to. So I have put, oops, that one's dirty. But I have taken it back down to first speed. Anytime I add like a lot of dry ingredients, flour, cocoa powder, powdered sugar, those kinds of things, I always take it down to low speed so it doesn't like poof out at me. Also, a lot of times I'll kind of pulse my machine where I turn it on and off, kind of, just to make sure I know it's not going to poof. But if I'm already ready to turn it off, I catch it a little bit faster than if it goes all over me. Alright, so watch it because it goes quick. Alright, so you can see that this is almost a completely mixed cookie dough. There's still a little bit of flour around, but it's basically almost mixed. It's crazy fast, isn't it, how it goes? Crazy, crazy fast. Scrape the bowl again. And that way I can knock down a little bit of that flour. It's kind of sitting on that top edge. Then I can add wanted to, you could add chocolate chips here. For me, the fudge filling that we're gonna make here in a second is really, really chocolatey. You don't really need it. And chocolate is expensive, so personally I wouldn't do it. You could add raisins though, you could add dried cranberries, you could add orange zest, you could add all kinds of stuff, but we're gonna go straight to oatmeal. So again, I'm gonna pulse it a little bit so the oats don't pop out. They look pretty good, so I'm just gonna let that mix until it looks like all of my oats have mixed in really, really well. And just like that. So this dough is gonna be kind of two parts of our final product. It's gonna be a base, it's also gonna be a topping. So I'm gonna use a lot of this dough, 2/3 to 3/4 or so for the base, and then I'm gonna reserve some to top with after we've made the filling. And I'm gonna use my hands anyway. So I'm actually gonna clean my paddle with my hands, so you actually can get more off of your attachments with your fingers than you can with a spatula. And it's just fun. Everybody likes playing with the food, right? Guess that's not what we should be doing in the food industry. Alright. So I have my prepared pan here. Let's see. Yeah, great. I have my prepared pan. So I'm going to go ahead and put somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of my dough in here. This was something I was selling retail. I would have kind of scaled amount, so I would actually weigh how much I was putting inside, so it was the same every single time. But for this, I'm not that worried about it. So I've got my dough in here, and there's a couple ways that you can do this. One way is just to kind of pat it out with your hands, but you can see this is pretty sticky, and it can kind of get a little frustrating. So what I like to do, pause for a second and grab it. I didn't have this in my mise en place, you don't have to do it this way, it is a little bit more wasteful. You can also use saran wrap, but I already have this cut out from the other half of parchment that I needed. So you can actually use this to kind of help press it out. Another thing you might do is kind of notice where it needs to go. Start pushing. It's usually the corners where you need it to start going. So I can start pushing towards the corners. I can keep peeling it up to see where I am at. And doing it this way just keeps my hands a little bit cleaner. Again, you could do this with your hands. You don't have to. Use a piece of parchment. You can also use plastic wrap. I don't like using plastic wrap because it's much more expensive than parchment paper. So it's not as good for the environment, so I don't love that part either. And I'm also paying attention to how my parchment underneath is doing, so it kind of slid over a little bit. So I just slid it a little bit back. It is going to slide a little bit. No worries though, no worries at all. I'm just going to keep going until I'm happy with it. If I was doing this in a full-size sheet pan, it'd actually be way quicker, ironically, to do more, because I could use a rolling pin to do what I'm doing with my hands. And my hands aren't going to do quite as good of a job of keeping it nice and level, but our rolling pins are too big to fit in here. So we go with our hands for this smaller version. And that is okay. If you were making this at home, you could do the same recipe in like a 13x9 baking dish. It would work out really well. You definitely want something that's got sides though, because as you'll see here in a second, we're going to make our filling. And our filling's kind of runny. So if it didn't have sides and you went to put it in the oven, it could kind of leak out and be really messy. And that's not good. Close. And again, remember, it is more efficient if you're doing it in bigger quantities to use use the rolling pin. Obviously, this takes a while to do it this way. And I kind of want to double check to make sure it's looking nice and even, and I don't have too much going up the sides. I am going to trim off the sides when I finish these bars off, but I still want it to be as even as I can. So I'm pretty happy with that. I can just leave this here, just doesn't matter. But this can set aside, the rest of it can sit aside, and we're gonna go make our filling. Okay, so it's time to make our filling. In my bowl here, I have all of my filling ingredients. So there's my chocolate, my sweetened condensed milk, my butter, salt, and vanilla. And I'm going to put it on this pot, and I'm creating what's called a double boiler. So a double boiler essentially is a pot of water, ironically not double boiling, it should be simmering, but double simmerer is hard to say, so they call it a double boiler. And what that does is it's going to gently heat up whatever is in my bowl. So I'm going to put this on, so hopefully you can see that it's just at a simmer, it's not at a rapid boil. So simmer is just when there's a little bit of bubbles, not a lot of bubbles. And that's just going to make this go nice and slowly. It's really, really easy to go from melted chocolate to burnt chocolate. And there's nothing you can do to fix burnt chocolate. So we want to make sure we melt this slowly. So I have, very important too, that the bowl you use is something that can handle a lot of heat. So you wouldn't want to use a plastic bowl. If you used a glass bowl, you'd want to make sure it's a glass bowl, again, that can handle heat, because not all glass bowls can. So metal's a really, really great option. And you just want to stir it occasionally. You don't have to stand here and just babysit it the entire time. But you do want to stir it, because otherwise it still could burn a little bit. Really important when you set up a double boiler is that the water that's inside the pot should never touch the bowl that's on top. Because if it does, and your water gets to a boil, it'll burn whatever is inside. So we want to make sure we do this a little bit gently. And you can already see a lot of the chocolate is melted. The nice thing about this, and anytime you're melting chocolate, is you can actually pull it off a little bit earlier than you think. Because there's a lot of heat that's in this bowl, if you pull it off a little earlier, you can continue to stir it, and the residual heat will melt the rest of your chocolate. My butter in here was soft, so it melted really quickly. It doesn't have to be, because you're melting it anyway. It could come straight out of the fridge, but it certainly goes faster. If it's cold, a lot of times I'll kind of cube it up just to make sure it melts quickly. All right, so I'm like 90% melted now, so I'm going to turn off my heat. Check to see how hot this is. Woo. And I don't have towels. I'm going to get towels, I'm going to take this off, and then I'm going to just finish stirring it until all the chocolate is melted, and then it's time to finish the assembly of the bars. Okay, so all of my components are made, so now I can assemble it. So I'm going to take off that parchment from earlier, set that aside, and now I'm going to pour over my topping. And you can see like kind of a skin has formed just from the time from me moving all the camera equipment from over by the stove over here, but I'm not worried about it at all. It's not a big deal. So no frets if that happens to you. I can stir it back up, but what's going to happen is it's just going to kind of melt when it goes in the oven. So again, not worried about it, no panicking. Pour that over. Make sure I get it all out. We want that chocolatey goodness. And then I can take this spatula and just spread it out. I could use an offset spatula, or you might call it like an icing spatula. But this is already dirty and I'll be able to get this pretty even. If this had sat for a long time, actually it might have sat too long, but moving camera equipment's hard. So as it cools back down, the chocolate starts to firm back up a little bit. And this chocolate at room temperature is firm. So wouldn't be a bad idea to have an offset spatula as part of your mise en place, just to make sure you can get this nice even. Again, this has cooled down a decent amount. I'll still be able to get it pretty even, so I'm not too worried about it. If I wasn't filming, I probably would go get it. That's okay. No worries. I can kind of give it a little bang here on the table to help as well. I'm not sure if you could tell, but it did kind of settle it out a little bit, and now it's pretty even. So the last thing to do is to put our topping on. So all you need to do is take your cookie dough and break it up into little pieces and sprinkle it on top. It's very, very hot in here today, so just sitting here, this has gotten really, really soft. And it's gonna be a little difficult for me to work with. So what I'm actually gonna do is sprinkle just a little bit of extra flour in here. And it's just gonna dry it out enough that just to help me work with it and it kind of crumble a little bit better. It is very hot. I'm a little sweaty, gross, not gonna lie. So you're probably watching this way later, but it's July right now and it's very hot in this bake shop. So hopefully you can see just a little bit of flour just kind of making it a little bit more crumbly. I'm gonna actually just get my hands. I could put this back on the mixer to do this, but it's gonna very kind of quickly go from crumbly to just really all the way mixed back in, which is not what I want. Because if I just mix it all the way back in, then it kind of turns back into dough. That's not what I want. But you can see it's kind of breaking apart a little bit easier. So there's still some big clumps, but there's a lot of small clumps, which is great. So I can still take these kind of bigger clumps and break them up. So it's almost like a crumble topping, which is really cool. It gives it a little bit of cool texture, as well as like a really cool look as well when it's done. So it's almost kind of got like this almost kind of sandwichy look, but it kind of looks like you did a lot more work, like you made 3 components, but you really only made 2. It's really awesome. In this industry, we have to think about ways to make things seem different and difficult, but also be very efficient. So this is an interesting way to take a dough and get kind of 2 uses out of it. So I'm just gonna go and sprinkle this evenly until I've used all of my dough. And I kind of go around the first time, and then I kind of go in and fill in the holes as I go. This can take a little bit of time, especially, like I said, when it's hot and this dough is cold. Or hot. It's hot and this dough is hot. Sorry, there's no cold in here. But it's good to know how to work in different kinds of conditions, like I've said before. Sometimes your kitchens are just really hot. It's really, really common for bake shops to be hot, because there's giant ovens in them. Our ovens here are actually pretty small compared to a lot of bakeries, so it can definitely get a lot hotter. So I'm just gonna keep going until it's all nice and even on top, and then we're gonna go in the oven. All right, all the topping is sprinkled on top. And you might think to yourself, well, you can't hardly see the chocolate anymore. And that's okay, because when we slice it, you're gonna get this really nice contrast of layers. It's gonna look really, really cool. So this is gonna go into my 350-degree oven until the top starts to get nice and golden brown. So what essentially is gonna happen is you're gonna get the bottom cooked so that it's like soft cookie. The chocolate is gonna get warm, which is gonna help let this kind of settle in a little bit so it's nice and adhered to the top. And then this top is gonna get a little bit crisp. So you have 3 different textures throughout your bar. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this oven in the, oven. This is gonna take much longer than our cookies did, obviously, because it's much, much larger. So we're gonna watch it and we're gonna see how it goes. I'm also gonna make sure I rotate it, just like with our cookies, the back can bake faster than the front. So I'm gonna start this in probably for like 15 or 20 minutes, and then probably that'll be when I rotate it. So I'm gonna get this in the oven now, and I'll show you what it looks like soon. Hot oven. Let that steam come out. So it's been 20 minutes, so I want you to see how it looks. So hopefully you can see that a lot of our dollops have kind of almost like rounded off a little bit, which is great. It's also looking a little drier. If I touch it, it's not sticky anymore. The heat has dried it out, but it's not really browning yet. And that browning is gonna be a really great indication that my cookie dough on the bottom is done. You'll also see that I've put a half sheet pan underneath, and I do that for 2 reasons. One, it's just easier to handle versus trying to pull this out. Another is because this is a deck oven, there's a lot of heat in the bottom, so I don't want the bottom of my bars to burn. And another reason is because once this is done, I'm gonna put it on one of our speed racks, and our speed racks don't really fit these hotel pans really well, but they fit these sheets and half sheet pans really well, so it's just gonna make it easier when this is done. So I'm gonna rotate it again so it can cook evenly, and I'm gonna set it for 10 to 15 more minutes. Come take a look at it, see how it's browning, and I'll show you what that looks like. Hot oven. All right, so let's see how it looks. It's been another 15 minutes. Hopefully you can see that it's gotten nice and golden on top, and that is absolutely perfect. It's actually poofed a little bit, and if I kind of push it, you can see that this got almost like a skin. Because there's so much chocolate, we don't have to worry about whether or not this is gonna set up, because chocolate room temperature is gonna set up perfectly. So really we're just looking for that color as an indication that the top is nice and got a little bit of crispness, and then the bottom is gonna be cooked all the way through. So I am gonna take this out and I'm gonna let it cool. This bar is gonna cut much better cold, and even better semi-frozen. So I'm gonna let this cool at room temperature till it's cold enough to go into the freezer, and then I'm gonna freeze it overnight before I cut it. Our oatmeal fudge bars have been in the freezer overnight, and I've let them sit out a little bit at room temperature to make it a little bit easier. But the first thing we need to do is get them out of the pan. They're really cold, so usually if I just tip it over, it doesn't pop out. So I need a little friend to warm up the outside so that it'll release, and this is my friend, one of my best friends. I love using a blowtorch. I will definitely find excuses to use a blowtorch. So this is my blowtorch. I just attach the top to the base, which is our gas. And when I use it, I need to make sure I'm being safe because it is a blowtorch. So a flame is gonna come out of here, so I never wanna face this at someone's face. Never wanna face it at my face. I don't want to be really loud. When I turn it on, I'm very loudly say torch so that everybody around me can hear me. So I'm going to turn this knob so it says off that way, so you turn it the other way until you can hear it. You hear the gas releasing, and then you're going to click, and as you click, you're going to say torch. And we get a nice strong flame, which we don't want quite that strong, so we're just gonna go ahead and turn it down a little bit so that's in the direction that it said off. And then we're just gonna heat the outside of this pan up, and that's gonna help release our bars. And I wanna keep it moving. I don't want any spot to get super soft, because the whole idea was to make sure these bars were nice and cold so they cut really, really cleanly. Sides, make sure I'm not getting too close to the cutting board because it will burn, and if I am done, I'm going to turn it off, and I can always just turn it right back on. So what I like to do is kind of push on it, and sometimes that'll help it release. Another thing, so there's parchment on the bottom but not on the side, so I'll take a paring knife and I'll run it along the edges to help it release as well. A second time just in case I spot or something. Now, when I'm doing this, I'm trying not to push into the bottom of the pan because I don't want to cut in the pan. If I cut in the pan, then I get metal shards into my bars, which I don't want at all. Ta-da! There it goes. Sometimes you have to keep torching it, but today it decided to come out easy for me, which is awesome. So then I'm just gonna peel off all this parchment. And because it's frozen, I can just easily turn it over. It's pretty solid. And now it is ready to cut into portions. All right, so time to cut this bad boy up. So I have my cutting board. I have a nice, sturdy, long chef's knife. The longer, not the longer the better, you don't want like a machete, but a longer one is better so I can make nice straight lines. I also have a vessel with some hot water in it and a clean towel and then somewhere for my finished bars to go. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna trim off the edges. So if you look to the sides, it's pretty hard to like not have the oatmeal kind of coming up the side and it's not quite as pretty. So we're gonna trim off the sides. So just off the edge. And because it is frozen, there's a little bit of work, but you can see that now you can see the layers a little bit more clearly. Now, this is not trash. This could be a lot of things. This could be a snack for you. This could be a treat for the dishwashers or other cooks that you work with. It could be cut up really small and put into ice cream or made into like an ice cream topping or something like that. Get creative with your leftovers. Remember, you paid for them. Use them. So we're going to trim all these edges all the way around, trying our best to keep it nice and square. And I'll admit, doing that with the Oatmeal Fudge bars can be a little bit difficult because of the crumble top. Sometimes the crumbles will try to set you off in one direction or the other. All the way. You know what, I just realized I didn't actually describe what I'm doing over here with my hot water. So, I have my hot water. I'm putting my knife in between each cut. So it's doing a couple things, heating up the knife, which is gonna make it easier to go through my frozen bar. But it's also cleaning off my knife so that every cut is nice and clean. If I just kept going with the knife, you'd get all the smudges everywhere and it wouldn't look nearly as professional as it did. But if I just put it in to here, and try to cut, there's lots of water on my knife, and then I get all this wetness on my bars, which would be weird. So I have a clean towel. I don't know if you can see that I'm wiping my knife on. And very important that when you wipe your knife, the blade is facing out, not in, because if it's facing in and your towel's thin somewhere or something, you can cut your palm. So blade should be facing out. So now the blade is hot, it's gonna cut easier, but it's not dirty, but it's also not wet. So it's usually easier when you're cutting something to, instead of like cutting it this way and hoping you end up with kind of like the same size pieces, it's easier to kind of cut in half and then cut that into halves or thirds or whatever you want to do, as opposed to just like, okay, I'll cut here and then here and then here and then like I have this weird little slice at the end. I'm going to cut these kind of retail size. When I say retail size, I mean big. Because if you were selling these in a bakery, you want to sell them in big pieces versus small. But you don't have to do that. I've seen retail places that'll sell like little bite-sized brownies or bars or something like that. You could do that. But it is more labor intensive. So I would suggest the bigger route. So I think I'm going to do this in half and then do each of these in half again. And again, I don't know if you can see, but I'm kind of changing and I'm putting my body weight over the bars because, like I said, it is frozen. So putting my body weight over the bars just helps me get through it a little bit easier. You want to try to be as consistent as you can with these kinds of cuts. Again, you don't want to be having all kinds of different size bars because the tiny ones won't sell. Then you'll have a bunch of product that doesn't sell. So I'll cut these in a little bit. I just want to show you these real quick. So let's see. I think I'm going to cut this into thirds. Sometimes I like to just kind of give myself a starter line. So I'll cut this into thirds. And this is probably about the size I would do for retail. And you can see, even though I've cut many a bar, the sizes they're close, but they are a little bit different. So let me show you a little bit of a trick for that. Squares are really difficult to get perfect, even for professionals who've done it 1,000 times. So what I like to do is I like to cut stuff into triangles. So once I cut these in triangles, you're going to see that your eye fools you and they look way more consistent in size. And like this one is a little bit more rectangular than square. When I cut it into a triangle, it just looks like a triangle. It also makes it a little bit more unique. A lot of places don't do it in triangles, so. But this would still be a great retail size, especially like if your place sandwich shop or whatever. This would be a great size dessert. Or you could do, the big one. That's fine too. But I think this would still be a really great retail size. So I'll do the same thing for the other ones. But that's how you cut up your oatmeal fudge bars. You can garnish them with a little bit of powdered sugar if you want. They look really nice. But if you're doing it on a retail, you probably wouldn't want to do that because it takes a little bit of time, a little bit more money, and the powdered sugar won't last that long. It'll just kind of melt into your product, which can sog out the top. So if you were doing this on a buffet, you could dust it with some powdered sugar. But if you're doing it for retail, so it might sit in a case for a day or two, you probably wouldn't want to do that. But anyway, that's it. That's our oatmeal fudge bars all done.